Okay, so in this video we'll continue our discussion of the regulation of arterial pressure. In the past two videos we established the two main important regulatory processes of blood pressure, which are the baroreceptors and the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System. Just to review quickly, the baroreceptor system, we talked and we gave an example of acute hemorrhage, and that is decreased. We have, due to acute hemorrhage, we have decreased volume, which is decreased arterial pressure. And what happened is the stretch receptors and the carotid sinus, they felt that there was decrease. Therefore, what happened is we had a decrease of the parasympathetic outflow, and we had an increase of the sympathetic outflow to the heart and the blood vessels. And therefore, what we did is we increased heart rate, we increased contractility, we had constrictions of the arterioles, constrictions of the veins, and all of that led to normalizing blood pressure after having a low blood pressure, which was dangerous to our body. The second video, which we talked about the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System, just a quick overview of that, is we gave the example of, again, acute hemorrhage, which is a low arterial pressure, and then that leads our kidneys to release renin, and renin helps us with the conversion in order to have angiotensin 2, and that has four main effects which you should review that increases blood pressure or normalizes blood pressure in this case. So now let's talk about other regulatory processes that are actually still important. They're not the main ones, but they're important in regulating arterial blood pressure. So these are listed here, and there are four of them. The ones that happen in cerebral ischemia, that's number one. Number two is chemoreceptor in the carotid and the aortic body. That's different than the baroreceptors, but they're also important in regulating arterial blood pressure. We have vasopressin, which is the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. We're also going to be talking about the atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP, released from the atria. So let's talk about the first one here, which is the cerebral ischemia. And cerebral ischemia is when our brain becomes ischemic. The partial pressure of CO2 in the brain tissue increases. Okay, makes sense. Now the chemoreceptors in the vasomotor center, they respond by increasing what? Increasing the sympathetic outflow. So you increase the sympathetic outflow to the heart and the blood vessel, and that leads to constriction of the arterioles, causing intense peripheral vasoconstriction, and that increases, therefore, what? The total peripheral resistance. That's our goal. Our goal is to increase blood pressure. So by increasing total peripheral resistance, we're helping with increasing what? The blood pressure. Okay? So the blood flows to all the other organs, and therefore we have blood return to the brain. Again, to remind you, we're talking here about a case in which we have low blood pressure in case of, for example, acute hemorrhage. So what we just developed here is in cerebral ischemia, we have increasing sympathetic outflow in order to compensate for that low blood pressure using peripheral vasoconstriction, and also we have what we call them mean arterial pressure that also can increase due to it can increase to life-threatening levels. It's not really the main important thing here right now, but we'll continue talking about the other three mechanisms. So moving on to the chemoreceptor and the carotid and the aortic body, we have in that part or that regulatory process of the arterial blood pressure, we need to know that this is located by the bifurcation of the common carotid arteries along the aortic arch, which is kind of a little close to where the baroreceptors were. Now, why are these important? These are important because they have very high rates of O2 consumption and very, very, very sensitive to the decrease of partial pressure of O2. So now we have a system that is covering everything, and our body is pretty amazing because the baroreceptor were taking care of what? They were taking care of changes in the actual pressure or actual volume or of the stretch. Now we have another system here, which is the chemoreceptor system, that's taking care of the oxygen. So let's talk about a decrease in PO2. What happens with that? It activates vasomotor centers, which produce vasoconstriction, and that increases TPR again, which is increasing total peripheral resistance, and that increases arterial pressure. Excellent. Moving right along to the vasopressin. Vasopressin is, again, like I said earlier, is the antidiuretic hormone. And why is that important? It's involved in the regulation of blood pressure in response to hemorrhage, like this case. It's not in the minute-to-minute regulations like the other two main regulatory processes that we talked about, but it's there to help. Now, atrial receptors, they respond to a decrease in blood volume in this category, and this causes the release of vasopressin from the posterior pituitary. So let's say this in another word. So the vasopressin gets released from where? From the posterior pituitary. It gets released. Why does it get released? Because of decrease in blood volume. Okay. So now, what are the effects of vasopressin? Why is vasopressin so important? Why is it here on the list of regulation of arterial blood pressure? Well, it has two effects. The first one, it's a potent vasoconstrictor. You need to remember that. Vasopressin is a potent vasoconstrictor. So what does that mean? It increases total peripheral resistance. Here is our friend total peripheral resistance. Keeps haunting us back and forth, back again and again and again. Increased total peripheral resistance, what does that do? Increases blood pressure. And this happens using activation of the V1 receptors. So V1 receptor responsible with the vasoconstriction, increasing total peripheral resistance. Now, what's the other role of vasopressin? It increases water reabsorption. Why is that important? Can you tell me, why is water reabsorption important? I'm sure you're answering it, and you can already make a hypothesis about it. But water reabsorption happens where? By the renal distal tubule and the collecting duct, and that increases blood pressure. Yes, that's the answer pretty much. And that happens using the V2. Again, so let's review. Vasopressin is released by the posterior pituitary in response to low blood pressure, and we have its effect on the V1 receptors by vasoconstriction, increasing total peripheral resistance, and also increasing water reabsorption using the V2 receptor. Now let's finally talk about the atrial natriuretic peptide. It's hard for me to say. So atrial, that means it comes from the heart, specifically the atrium, and then the natriuretic peptide is a peptide that's released from the atrium. So let's learn more about that. So as I said, it's released from the atria in response to increase in blood volume and atrial pressure. This causes a relaxation of the vascular smooth muscles and a dilation of the arterioles and decreased total peripheral resistance. So in this sense, we're talking about how about if we get increased total blood pressure. So this is not related to these three. In the case of the ischemia that I was talking about here, is just the atrial natriuretic peptide is in response to increase in blood pressure. It causes the relaxation of vascular smooth muscle. We increase total peripheral resistance. So in someone who has hypertension, we are helping our heart is helping them by decreasing the total peripheral resistance, therefore decreasing the blood pressure. It also causes increased excretion of sodium and water by the kidney, and that reduces the blood volume, and which is an attempt in order to bring the arterial pressure down to the normal level. Now finally, it inhibits renin secretion. Why is that important? Well, if you are not able to get to the answer quickly, review video number 2. But remember again, the renin system was important in what? It was important in increasing blood pressure. So here it makes sense. If this atrial natriuretic peptide, its main goal is to decrease blood pressure, we will want to inhibit the renin, because that renin is opposite. It increases blood pressure, so we need it to be decreased. Thank you for watching my videos. If you have any questions, please post them, and I'm going to try to answer them as soon as I can, and also give me feedback. Thank you.